Welcome to my study of Ryan Kingslien's construction of the female head. The first part, we are focusing on the 8 volumes of the head. What we're doing here is we're starting off with, it's a default ZBrush form of the head, and you could easily do this with the sphere. If you can get them close to proportionate in this phase, which is quite simple, it saves you a lot of time in the final part, not having to tweak proportions. He uses a lot of masking, which I try to do as much as I could. I tend not to mask a lot when I'm doing initial parts of sculpting. And ZBrush, or Blender, which we're using right here, is a little, I find the masking is a little not as precise as ZBrush is, saving time in the long run, because the actual sculpt wasn't super long. I would say it took me about maybe 6 hours to get it to look kind of like what Ryan's is, but then I spent another 5 hours just resolving, just trying to get as close to the right image, which is the reference. And I also was spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the fat pads look aesthetic and have very nice lines, and messing around with material settings, which I don't show in this video because I was having some crashes while sculpting. For some reason I can't use Eevee, which is the real-time shader, and I'm not exactly sure what that is yet, so I updated Blender recently. I'll see if that fixes the issue. These 8 volumes I'm sculpting here set up the underlying curves of the face, and a lot of times you don't get the curves right just doing it based on features like sculpting it. So a lot of times you get the eyes looking flat or the nose looking flat because you're not thinking about how they attach to a structure. So with this structure, it leads directly into a skull, which is what everyone's head's based on, but it gives you a very nice abstraction, which is pretty easy to sculpt. And I could even sculpt this at a lower poly count than I'm using here, but the brushes work a little bit better at higher poly counts. In part 2, I exited split screen mode and went into a mode with a overlay, so both the reference and the sculpt are on top of each other in transparency, so it's easier to adjust the proportions. And the goal of this part of sculpting is to get a very simplified skull. First, I'm making the eye sockets right here, which I will cut out, and then we make the nasal bone, which helps you indicate where the nose will actually be placed. And the eye sockets also help you figure out where the eyes are placed. So knowing their shape pretty well really helps a lot. This is a extremely simplified skull though, but you really don't need to go super detailed when you're doing a full construction of the face. I just think it's kind of a waste of time to do every single detail of the skull, but it's good to know it over time. But this will set us up really nicely for the next part, which is the nose blocking. In part 3, we are working on the nose. And the way that Kingslien approached it is he masked off the part of the nose that's missing from the bone. You pull it out. And then he makes a big deal of separating the top of the nose from the bottom, calling it the Disney princess line because it's kind of rounded at the bottom. I understand that the separation of the top and the bottom is very helpful. He cut out the wings of the nose pretty quickly, and you want to spend a lot of time getting the volume just right. And what's different than most ones is with this course you focus a lot on the cartilage planes, which help divide the nose up. You don't always see it in everybody's face, but sometimes you do, and it's good to know where they are, which are bumps on the nose, on the wings, and the sides, so you can see where all the form changes are. In part 4, we're going to focus on building out the lower part of the face. And this is almost like the muscles of the face, but there's not much detail that is done in this phase. There is a lot of concentration on getting the muzzle, which is the lips and teeth area, the shape that it forms. And I also work on more of the profile of the lips so it matches the reference at this point before I even cut them. And what's really cool is you use a line to cut out the actual lips, and you just form these basic shapes that you can make nice planes of the upper and lower lips. I'm not worried about any details at this point, but getting the planes in the right spot and the columns of the lips, which is the area underneath it, it really sets you up for success later on. And it's good to divide everything very clearly so it's not messing up how things look. And we're going to start with building the masseter here, which is the muscle, one of the largest muscles on the face, and it's often visible. And this just gets the face to look a little bit more what you expect. It gets the volumes in there so you can get more of the likeness at this point. And the jaw is a huge part of a likeness in general. It's kind of, I think, understated how important a jaw is to making a likeness work. So I spent a lot of time just getting that to work nicely and match the references. And the final part is just cleaning everything up. In part 5, we are working first on the ears, which you use masking to push the forms in, and then you slowly build it up with the clay tubes brush. And it's just a slow, sort of methodical way of doing this. I honestly think that you could mask the different sections of the ears and push them out and then form them, and that would actually save you some time, but I will explore that in the future. But a lot of the part of the ear that's actually kind of tricky is how it attaches. So the back of the ear, it's always good to spend some time making it fit there well. And the attachment to the ear to the lower jaw is very important in terms of silhouette. So always take your time when you're working there. And a lot of what I'm doing with the ear is I'm just refining it and making the plane sharp so that everything is very clean. The ear can look very lumpy if you rush sculpting it, so you have to take your time to smooth out all the forms. After finishing the ear, we are going to start working on the side of the head here. The biggest plane next to the ear is the temporalis muscle, and it's large. It fills in the curvature on the side of the skull, and it gives a nice roundness when it's in there. And there is a lot of refinement to the zygomatic arch too, which is that bone next to the ear. It's a really important bony landmark, so it's really good to get it sculpted close to what it should be. And it helps establish the board of the eye, the socket. Now here we are masking out where I'm going to be cutting, and we're separating the glabella, which is that bump on the bone in the front. I'm not sure what the side of the eye socket's called. And then there's a part in the middle of the skull, a round form called a frontal eminence, and it's exaggerated here, but it lets you know where it is. And then the sides of the forehead, I think that we call them the temporal lines usually, and a lot of people have them on their face. And then after everything's placed, I go back into the transparency mode to make sure everything lines up so the proportions are just right, and it will make sculpting the eye much easier. And a lot of this is just extra refinement. So I like to tweak things and smooth them just to get them all nice and clean. So I try to avoid my natural lumpiness when I sculpt. But I still end up with a lot of lumpiness, so that's something I'd like to work on more. Part 6, eye construction. First we push in the side of the mesh that's sticking out, and then we fill out a lot of the eye socket, and I highlight where the eye will be, and I use a lot of masking to get the eye in the correct location, which is kind of wide set in this model. The eye sticks out a lot more than you think, and this whole area kind of gives me a good idea of where I need to sculpt. And this is the most interesting part. We're doing palpable ligaments which connect the eyes to the eye socket, and they create a lot of the form of the eye. It's a beginner's mistake not to have them in there, so it's really good to know where they are. And the upper eyelid is actually the main driver of the eye shape, so you want to spend a lot of time on it. The next part that's interesting is building up this fat pad underneath the eye. Gives a really nice transition to where the lower eyelid will be. They kind of blend together, so it's kind of nice to start with the lower base first. And then here is the masking for the lower eyelid, which we're just going to push out and then slightly clean up a little bit. The only thing that I would do different doing this next time around is getting the angle of the upper and lower eyelid to match reference from the beginning. It's a subtle detail, but it has a big impact if you get it right. A lot of this is just cleanup of these forms because this method does create a lot of jaggies from the masking. And the next part, we're adding the fat pad that goes right above the eyelid, and it kind of blends into where the eyebrow will be. So, and then this is part of the actual nose, the glabella, and it creates like a T shape that connects to the nose. So it's a pretty large area that you have to get right, and I'm just focusing on getting the planes. And right there is part of the bottom of the cheek, and it's exaggerated, but it gives you a good idea to know where to attach the fat pads. And at this point, I'm just kind of cleaning up all the forms more, just because the next phase we're going to be adding more fat. This part we're just making sure the mesh didn't grow too much, so I popped it back into the model. And I always like to add like sharp edges to the eyelids to make them more planar. Part 7, I am working with fat pads using a line cuts rather than the Z-project method, which was in the course. Blender doesn't have a dedicated Z project function. So I have to use a plugin called Layers, which lets me make these cut lines on a layer, and I can turn them on and off, but you have to save to layer before you do it or you lose all your work. And the rest of the time I'm focusing on just getting the cheeks a little bit more fuller with fat pads. In part 8, I'm working on refining the lip forms, which I use fat pads to find the main forms. There's about 5 forms to the lips themselves and the border around the lower lip. I'm just looking at the references a lot to make sure everything's very precise. I use masking to get very sharp edges. And I do switch matte caps around a bit. I do wish this was a one-button press with this plugin, but it isn't. I have to do it for both sides, which is kind of annoying. And the rest of this is just refinement. Now, what was frustrating about this process was I tried to render an Eevee, and I lost all of my work in this section, so I had to actually watch this video to re-sculpt it again, and then I tweaked it for another 4 or 5 hours to get the forms just right. And I was trying to get these fat pads very clean. I added a paneling effect with a crease brush to make all the forms very exaggerated, and then I used a car paint shader to highlight all the plane changes easier.